Which character isn't considered a villain, but he's actually a bad guy? Story 1. Mr. Potato Head is the real villain of Toy Story 1. It's established pretty early on that he doesn't respect Woody or his authority, and seems bitter about Woody's status as favorite toy, and everything he does revolves around that resentment. So once Buzz shows up and the opportunity to tear Woody down and provoke a rivalry with Buzz keeps presenting itself, Potato Head takes it every time. His constant goading on Woody during Buzz's introduction, "Yeah, like the attic," etc. It's him who incites everyone to turn on Woody after Buzz is knocked out the window, where his resentment really comes up to the surface. "What happens if Andy starts playing with me more, huh? You gonna knock me out the window too?" Once he's gotten rid of Woody, he keeps foiling escape or rescue attempts to keep it that way. They're in Sid's house, known as a toy mutilator, and yet he accuses Woody of tearing Buzz's arm off, slicing the other toys on Woody in the moving van and refusing to hear him out that he's trying to save Buzz. He's also never shown regretting his actions like Rex and Slinky do. The shot of RC flying into the moving van and slamming into him feels deliberately framed as Potato Head being given his comeuppance. Mrs. Potato Head's arrival mellows him out, since now he has something to focus on besides his resentment towards Woody, and finally comes to regret it in Toy Story 2. Oh, you had to bring that up. Story 2, In the Craft, when the four girls first tap into their powers. Each one uses them to make a big personal change. One of them heals her disfigurement. Another takes revenge on a racist bully by making her hair fall out. A third lashes out at her abusive stepfather, which ends up killing him and, unexpectedly, leaves her family financially better off through his insurance. But then there's the main character. Instead of helping herself or protecting someone else, she immediately uses magic to mess with someone's free will, basically forcing a guy to become dangerously obsessed with her. That love spell eventually leads to his death after he tries to take advantage of her. The irony is that the movie frames the other girls as the villains, but no one ever calls out the fact that the protagonist was the first one to cross the line into something truly evil. Story 3, Severus Snape. Bro was a grown man bullying children to the point of becoming one's greatest fear, and he practically got off on doing so. He was okay with the murder of a baby and his father, only switching sides when Voldemort didn't agree to spare just the mother he was horny for. He was openly and unapologetically bigoted in his youth. He only tried to save Harry from falling to his death because he felt guilty for hating a man that died defending his wife and child because he saved him previously, and saving Harry would let him hate the man in clear consciousness. And he proceeded to take all of his venom toward his childhood bully on his orphan child that never did anything to him. Snape wasn't a hero. He just hated the villain who killed his obsessive crush more than he hated the good guys. Story 4, Dr. Jekyll. The point of the book isn't that Jekyll and Hyde are different personalities. It's that Hyde is a different face that he can use to express his true desires pseudonymously. The potion doesn't change how he thinks, it changes how he looks, and so he uses that to be a piece of crap without repercussion. No adaptation seems to know this. It has been a long time since I read that book, but the way I remember it was that Hyde was Jekyll's baser desires. Not necessarily the same person, but part of the person. What made Dr. Jekyll a villain was that he wanted to be Hyde, that he couldn't stop being Hyde because he wanted to be that. It's a subtle distinction, I guess, but there are a lot of parallels between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and alcohol addiction. Story 5, Scarlett O'Hara is absolutely a villain protagonist. Scarlett O'Hara is 100% a villain protagonist. Yes, she's very much a product of her time and environment, but even with that context, she makes the wrong decision at basically every major turning point. In business, she's openly unethical, flat out admitting it's easier to cheat poor people than to play fair. In her personal life, she's cold, calculating, and self-absorbed, often putting her own wants above the well-being of her family and the people closest to her. She neglects her children, treats her relationships as transactional, and leaves a trail of damage behind her. At minimum, she destroys Ashley's and Sue Ellen's lives, and depending on how you interpret things, you could argue she does the same to Melanie and Rhett too. Scarlett isn't misunderstood, she's just selfish and destructive. Story 6, The Parents from the Parent Trap, both versions. Mom, I want a divorce. I'll take one of our twin girls and you take the other. Let's not tell them about each other. Also, I can't see your daughter ever again and you can't see mine. It's easier that way. Dad, fine by me. Split right down the middle. What absolute crap. It hits even harder if you're a parent. I could never just say goodbye to one of my kids like that. Imagine thinking any of this is okay. Story 7, Jaime Lannister. He is a super popular character after he gets his hand cut off by viewers or readers and Graham alike, but man, he gets whitewashed to the highest degree. Guy at his core is an oathbreaker, kingslayer, and fathered 3 incest babies, and was perfectly content with those babies inheriting the throne under the guise they weren't his. His hero turn is underserved. He may not be seen as a hero, but he's definitely not seen as the villain he clearly is. Story 8, Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. This one is really tricky, but you're right. Paul is not a good guy, but everything Paul does is predicated on the fact that he knows, in the end, it'll lead to humanity's enlightenment. In the books, it's very much painted that the presentience that he receives makes everything that he has to do necessary, and he does not want to do it. He fights every bit of it all the way through, knowing that that's how it's going to turn out anyway. Story 9. Achilles wasn't the great hero he's often made out to be. He was basically a spoiled man-child. When his pride was hurt, he sulked in his tent and distracted himself with women, letting thousands of Greeks die in battle while he refused to fight. He had incredible strength and privilege, but almost no sense of duty or responsibility to anyone but himself. The real hero of the Trojan War was Hector, son of Priam. Hector never wanted the war, but for the sake of honor and loyalty, he defended his brother Paris after he stole Helen and stood by his people and his king without complaint. He ultimately gave his life protecting them. The Greeks themselves saw the war as a cautionary tale, not a victory story. Achilles wasn't a role model. He was the warning sign, like a mythic Walter White or Tony Soprano. Story 10. Batman regularly violates the civil rights of the criminals he apprehends. There's a great comic series that explores this idea. It's called White Knight. It starts off with him causing millions of dollars of destruction to the city chasing the Joker, who has killed no one in his crimes. He chases him to a pharmaceutical company and pours pharmaceutical drugs down his throat while beating the crap out of him. The entire police force is on body cams watching him do it while no one stops him. It also explores the idea that this billionaire is buying tech for himself to stop villains instead of using it to prevent reasons why the villains exist, such as using the money to help lower economic classes, money in training to help local police forces, and rebuilding segregated pieces of the city that he helped destroy trying to fight villains. Story 11, Andrew Lincoln's character Markin Love. Actually is often seen as this sweet, heartbroken guy, but if you actually look at his actions, he's pretty villainous in his own way. He's supposed to be best friends with Peter, yet he spends the entire film pining after Peter's new wife, Juliet. Instead of moving on or keeping those feelings to himself, he pulls one of the most selfish stunts imaginable, showing up at her door to basically confess that he'll love her forever while her husband is literally upstairs. And Juliet doesn't exactly come off well either, because she kisses him before heading back to Peter, like that somehow makes it less awful. Mark isn't twirling a mustache or plotting evil schemes, but betraying your best friend's trust like that makes him one of the most subtly awful characters in the movie. Story 12, Walter White. The whole story is about him being a good guy in a bad situation, and eventually crossing over into becoming the bad guy. The second half is focused on him being the bad guy, really. They just did the show so brilliantly that he's a likable bad guy, and you can feel for him on why he got that way. It's one of those shows that you can watch a few times, and each time you notice how calculated they were a bit more, because you notice different character arcs starting really subtly in small things, taking people down the path they go on that you miss watching the first time. Story 13, Jim Halpert gets framed as the charming, relatable everyman in the office, but if you really look at his behavior, he's actually kind of terrible. He constantly bullies Dwight, not just harmless pranks, but targeted stuff that would get someone written up in a real workplace. He openly disregards his boss, makes a point of undermining authority, and was always lurking around Pam, subtly sabotaging her relationship with Roy until it finally fell apart. Even after he got together with Pam, Jim pulled huge moves behind her back, buying a house she never asked for, or later taking a job in another city without talking it through. On screen, his smirk and sarcasm are fun, but in real life, a guy like Jim would be unbearable in the office. Honestly, Roy decking him would have been the most realistic outcome. Story 14, The fact that Interstellar is supposed to be a sci-fi romance with a bittersweet ending when it is clearly a horror movie with a deeply tragic one has always been wild to me. I first watched it on a bus with my classmates on a trip in high school, and a good portion of us started booing when the crisp rat character didn't die trying to fix the ship or whatever. Our orchestra teacher was baffled at this reaction, somehow. Story 15. After the Bridgerton shows came out, I decided to read the books. The shows are beautiful, both visually and particular plot points are sanitized to create some really great romance. But the books, the first couple made me feel pretty slimy about the main characters of each. In the first, the sweet little Daphne, well, what she does is pretty textbook abuse through alcohol, not violence, and the author explores the power exchange between the characters when she does it, and the knowledge she has when she does it. It's just gross and definitely felt pretty villainy. I know it worked out for them in both the show and the book, but she's actually terrible for what she did. In the second, Anthony gets pretty stalkery, forcing Stockholm Syndrome on the gal he ends up with. And again, it works out in the end, but it's still pretty villainy. I've stopped reading the books for now. I love the shows. They're beautiful and romantic. I want to enjoy them and let them marinate before reading more of the books. Story 16. Scott Pilgrim is one of those characters who seems lovable on the surface, but the more you think about him, the worse he actually gets. He's selfish, manipulative, and constantly embellishes things to make himself look better. At first, audiences root for him, but eventually you start to realize just how awful he really is. He throws himself into this over-the-top quest for a girl who doesn't even seem that into him. And Ramona isn't innocent either, since she feeds off attention and validation without giving much back. Meanwhile, Scott leaves emotional wreckage behind, especially with Knives and Kim, who deserve better than being treated like disposable stepping stones. And on top of all that, if you take the story literally, he's basically a sociopathic killer who straight up murders people in public. The more you peel back, the harder it is to see him as the underdog hero. Story 17, Woody, from Toy Story. I had to Google some events from the movie, my bad guy argument. In the original film, Woody's initial actions towards Buzz Lightyear are driven by extreme narcissistic jealousy of his own leadership position. He repeatedly puts Buzz in danger, including pushing him out of a window. Hello, who the hell pushes a comrade out of a window out of envy? Which immediately leads to Buzz being captured by Sid, creepy Sid. His desire to be Andy's favorite toy is selfish, and he treats other toys, like the little army men, as disposable things. I feel like that's the point of the movie though. Woody isn't supposed to be the good guy at the start. It takes him falling victim to his own machinations to realize that he was in the wrong. After that, he definitely grows into a better person by the end of the movie, and for the rest of the trilogy, never saw the fourth one. Story 18, Bruce Wayne from The Dark Knight Rises. Dude went full rich boy and locked himself away in his mansion while his business suffered, and because of that, his charity coffers ran dry. On top of that, he funded the development of a nuclear fusion generator, literally world-changing technology, and just decided to never show it to anyone or use it because he literally thought humanity at the time was beneath it. So instead of going to therapy to deal with his emotions surrounding the death of Rachel and the events that led to the death of Harvey Dent and the subsequent blaming of Batman, Bruce Wayne apathetically shirks all of his responsibilities, costs hundreds if not thousands of people their jobs, drives orphaned children onto the streets, and narcissistically hoards one of the greatest innovations in human history. Oh yeah, and he only decides to come out of retirement when the villain steals all of his money. Granted, he turns it around pretty hard in the pit, but he starts that movie off as a pretty crappy person. Story 19, I don't know how many people are familiar with Battletech and MechWarrior here, but Hans Davian, first prince of the Federated Sons, is a good example. He's a good guy, relatively speaking, in the sense that Maximilian Liao, Chancellor of the Capellan Confederation, is practically insane and rules a nation with a caste system, and Takashi Kurita, coordinator of the Draconis Combine, is a no-nonsense dictator. The other two successor states, the Laren Commonwealth and Free Worlds League, aren't an immediate threat and are kind of out of sight, out of mind for the Fed Sun citizens anyway. Hansa Davion and the Federated Sons themselves pride themselves as being the most free and just of the successor states in the Inner Sphere, and the only nation worthy of overseeing most of colonized space since the Star League. Long backstory on that one. What that really means in practical terms, however, is that Hansa Davion is nothing more than a warmonger who uses any sort of excuse about how horrible his rival nations are to start a conflict or invasion with them. The Fourth Succession War was started by Hans mainly so he could invade the Capellan Confederation and claim territory to connect his borders to the Laren Commonwealth, who he just married the underage next in line to purely for political reasons. Millions of innocent people were killed in an all-out invasion purely for political reasons that had nothing to do with them other than the fact that they happened to be living on those particular planets. Story 20, The Hound in Game of Thrones. He has no issue assassinating when it suits him, robbed and assaulted a poor farmer that gave him shelter. Overall, he is a bad guy, but he isn't considered a villain in the grand scheme of things. Lloyd from Dumb and Dumber. He's actually a backstabbing jerk that also took advantage of a blind kid by duping him into buying a dead bird. Tony Montana from Scarface. He's the protagonist of the movie, but he is technically a bad guy. He even admits to it in the movie LOL. Both Corleones from the Godfather movies. They are technically bad guys doing bad things, but they are not depicted as villains. Walter White from Breaking Bad. He wasn't a bad guy to begin with, but he sure does become one halfway through the show. He's never the villain of the story arcs, but he's done some bad stuff that would easily make him the villain from a different perspective. Story 21. He is regarded as a villain or necessarily a good guy, but Jesse from Breaking Bad is a pretty terrible POS. On multiple occasions, Jesse encourages people to become addicted to drugs, most noticeably his girlfriend Jane, who is a recovering drug addict. Also, the way Jesse treats his parents is pretty unfair. Sure, they kind of kicked him out of their life, but he probably put them through hell. The show sometimes portrays Jesse as a moral compass, but he is a lot worse than Walter White in some ways. Both of them were terrible humans. Story 22, Jessica Jones. Her ability to manipulate and resist the absolutely broken, man-child serial murderer human of mass destruction that was Kilgrave was a greater superpower than most of the entire superhero universe combined. She could have honed him, possibly changed him. He was effectively a child who did not understand consequences, patience, feelings, etc. At the very least, toxically manipulated him due to his obsession with her to literally end war as we know it. Kilgrave tells everyone in charge to stop it. End hunger. Kilgrave tells rich people to pour money into agriculture, advance sciences, ecology, and the quality of life of workers. Kilgrave rolls up to board meetings and stops CEOs and their ilk from prioritizing profit, massive bonuses, and put it back into pay, benefits, and research. The list goes on forever. Could she have fixed him? No way. Is Kilgrave a horrid little monstrosity? Absolutely. Would Jessica have been miserable and in danger forever? Certainly so. It would have been worth it for the whole world. And yes, I think it's the choice I'd make in her position. Can't ask someone to do what you wouldn't. Story 23, Dale Gribble. He's selfish, rude, and mean at various instances. He reported Hank to the FBI, blew up Hank's mailbox, released fire ants among many other things to Hank especially. He makes fun of Bill for being fat constantly. He tried to get his son to join a team his son hated so that he could get perks from the school. There are so many more things he does, but he's always trying to sabotage people and do things for his own personal gain. But I feel like his villainous gets lost through the comedy. Story 24, Tony Stark in the MCU. Let's see. Among other things, he hacked S.H.I.E.L.D., which means he probably saw all the Hydra files and never told anyone. He and Bruce created Ultron despite everyone telling him not to and nearly destroyed the world. Took a teenager into combat in another country because he blamed everyone else for his actions. Was a jerk to everyone, used Bruce Banner as his prat boy. What else? Story 25, Dumbledore gets way too much credit as the wise old mentor. Yeah, he's charming, mysterious, and has that twinkle in his eye. But when you peel back the layers, the guy is basically a master manipulator. He knew about Harry's fate from the start and still let this literal child grow up, thinking he had a chance at a normal life, only to reveal later that he was basically a lamb raised for slaughter. He also constantly withheld crucial information, things that could have saved lives if Harry or others had known sooner. On top of that, Hogwarts under his leadership was borderline negligent. Year after year, students were thrown into the near-death situations while he stood back, letting it play out. Sure, he fought for the greater good, but he was absolutely willing to sacrifice pawns, even kids, for his bigger picture. That's not saintly, that's cold-blooded. Story 26, people always frame Gatsby as this tragic romantic figure, the man who fought against the odds to create a life worthy of Daisy. But if you actually break it down, his story is pretty unsettling. He built an empire through crime, all in service of an unhealthy obsession with a woman he knew was married and had moved on with her life. His parties weren't about fun or community. They were bait to reel Daisy in. And when he finally gets her attention, he doesn't consider the fallout. He doesn't care that he's wrecking her marriage or that others are caught in the crossfire. It's all about his dream. That's not noble. It's selfish, delusional, and destructive. He's less a tragic hero and more a cautionary tale about obsession and entitlement disguised as love. Story 27, Ross is hands down one of the most toxic nice guys in TV history. The show tries to paint him as the awkward but lovable nerd, but when you watch as an adult, his behavior is honestly gross. He's jealous and insecure to the point of being controlling, especially with Rachel. Remember when he made a big deal about her having a male coworker, or how he constantly undermined her career because it took time away from him? Then there's the infamous "we were on a break" moment. Instead of taking responsibility, he used it as a lifelong excuse to justify sleeping with someone literally hours after their fight. He's also a terrible friend, whiny, self-absorbed, and often dismissive of other people's problems unless they relate to him. The laugh track covers it, but Ross isn't the lovable nerd. He's the guy you warn your friend not to date. Story 28, Ferris is idolized as the cool, rebellious teen everyone wanted to be, but if you take the nostalgia goggles off, he's actually kind of a terrible person. The whole movie is just him manipulating everyone around him to get what he wants. He drags Cameron, who is clearly depressed and dealing with a toxic home life, into his antics without caring about the consequences. Cameron's dad's car, basically the one thing he treasures, gets wrecked, and Ferris barely shows remorse. He also lies constantly, cheats his way out of school, and uses people for his personal entertainment. Sure, he's charismatic and fun, but his charm is basically a mask for being self-centered and reckless. Cameron needed a supportive friend, not a chaotic ringleader pushing him deeper into trouble.